Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you. And still at Yokoji, I really need to update that bio. It says 10 years. It's actually 20 years coming up in this month actually. 20 years on a mountain. Oh my goodness. It's good to be here. It's good to be back to visit with you. It's I don't know how long it's been. 12 months, 2 years. I don't even remember. Doesn't really matter. Nice to sit with you, and I appreciate the opportunity and to share with you today and to hopefully offer some encouraging words or even some useful words. Let's see. I was just reminded of a quote, and I just pulled it up. I just wanted to share with you just to begin. It's a story of Ananda, the Buddha's close attendant and cousin, apparently, who once said to the Buddha, "I think spiritual friendship, sangha, is half of a spiritual path. It's just so important to the journey." And the Buddha replied, "Ananda, spiritual friendship is the whole way. It's the whole of the way. Find refuge in the sangha." That's certainly an encouraging statement for me, and something that I've found to be true in my practice. Although I've always looked out of these particular eyes and walked around in this body, at least so far as I can remember, practicing alone is very difficult. Perhaps there's a time for that, but practicing as a group, practicing with like-minded, commonly intentioned friends, is a wonderful and vital support. And then when we look at the three treasures of three jewels of Buddhism, we have Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. There's an equality there between those three aspects of Buddhism. I've been looking back at some of the teachings of the Buddha recently. We just went by December 8th, what we call in Japanese then Rohatsu. That's in Japanese just means the 8th of December, which we commemorate as the Buddha's Enlightenment Day. So we have some ceremonies and remember and honor that in many ways. The best way to honor it is for each of us to become awakened. That's the Buddha's great declaration, what's called the lion's roar of the Buddha on seeing the morning star after long effort, said, "I, all beings, the great earth, are the wisdom and virtue of the awakened one to thusness." And that roar, that declaration has echoed down the ages, through the centuries, through the millennia, even into this point now. This great fact of awakening, the great mystery of this world, the great mystery of this life. After 20 years on a mountain, I'm afraid to say I have not yet resolved the mystery of life. Right? But I have become ever more mystified. But perhaps if there is a shift, it is I am gleefully engaged in the mystery. Not always gleefully, sometimes with real difficulty. But this is the life we are. This is the reality that we are experiencing. When I first became involved in practice, I wasn't particularly looking to become a Buddhist. I was interested on, I was the quest for enlightenment, the quest for realization and awakening. I'd always been uh, disturbed or puzzled by being alive, even as a young boy. I wondered why a lot of my friends didn't find it extremely strange to be here, spinning around on this little blue globe through infinite space. Like, how does everyone else think this is okay and normal? I was always a little strange in that way. And so I was drawn into ways of looking at this life and this reality. And I found Buddhism and I found Zen. And what I came to really maybe had an inkling at the beginning, and that was confirmed through years of practice, is often other religions, maybe other spiritual paths, other modalities to look at life would offer something up as existential truth and say, this is it. A model, a method, a description, a belief system, whatever that might be, and have a claim on existential truth. And of course, we look out into the wide world and we can see 2,500 years on from the Buddha, regrettably and tragically, the violence that comes from clinging to a view of existential permanent truth being represented in something that could be represented in words. Buddhism, I found to be very different. Right? The Buddha realized that the existential truth of our life cannot be described in words, cannot be defined by human beings, cannot be grasped, but it can be realized in our heart mind. It can be found beyond discriminatory thinking. It can be experienced. And through his great efforts and genius, somebody in the ancient world who is able to look deeply into the nature of this life and then to compose very clear practice methods, which still hold water today. They're still very relevant today, which are only relevant today because there is only today after all. So we have the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, all marks of existence, the three Dharma seals, and on. Right? Ways to look, to hand the responsibility to each of us. As the Buddha again clearly enunciated to his monks at the end of his life, it says, your responsibility to look. And here are some ways to look. Here are some methods to try. This is what I have found to be true. Try this out. Use what's useful. Use what helps reduce suffering and discard the rest. And even through all of these methods and ways to look, if we really boil it down, if we really distill the message of Dharma practice and Buddhism down to something very simple, but something very concentrated, it is that it is a way to reduce the suffering inherent in the human condition. Right? As human beings, we feel the bite of impermanence. We see the great fact of impermanence, perhaps in a way that other appearances, other beings do not seem to, right? I'm reminded by my cats, they don't ever seem to be having an existential crisis. They might be upset about, dinner being a little late by their clock, not late by mine, right? But not conscious or not looking into this fact of, my goodness, old age, sickness, death. When I read about that in the book on Buddhism in my 20s, I took it in a very abstract sense. Oh, yes, old age, sickness, death. That's right, I wasn't too concerned. And yet, as we go on in our life, we see this great fact of impermanence. Now, when I came to the Zen tradition, again, on this quest for realization, the Zen tradition is very sparing in its minimalist in its method. We use long periods of meditation, and well, basically, you could say living at a Zen center is something of a challenge or perhaps a downright assault on individuation, right? Which can be something of a painful process, but a way to really bring some pressure through meditation and the schedule in order, hopefully, to really to catalyze insight and ultimately wisdom. But it can be a steep path, and most of us don't live at spiritual centers for long periods of time, right? Most people are a little smarter than that, and are involved in much more everyday activities. And in my teaching path has broadened over the years since that bio was written and I got Dharma transmission and these kind of received Inca and these things. So, kind of like basically empowerments to, okay, maybe we can trust you to open your mouth about a few things. Let's see how it goes. And through that, I began to reach out into the world more, through the Insight community of the desert, through Palm Springs, where I met Christian, who originally invited me to your fine Sangha, right? Through Long Beach meditation, and through some other interactions, and starting to see what's important and maybe loosen some of the formal structures that we might have here at the Zen Center, where robes and short hair and incense are more in vogue, and then move into a more everyday practice. And yet, how to help transmit the kernel of truth, how to best share the Dharma in a different context. Now, recently, I had a class series on the six paramis, the six, or sometimes called the six parameters. In the Theravadan tradition, it's the 10 parameters. But, I always find six more approachable than 10, three more approachable than six, and one best. I like to pare things down, So six paramis really spoke to me, and does emerge from a Mahayana tradition. I shared, maybe 5 minutes before we began into the chat in the kind of, oh, this is what I'm gonna talk about today. And if I'd have been better prepared, I'd have sent it along ahead. But there you go. What can I say? I'm from the school of Zen Buddhism. We do things on the fly. But these six paramis, in looking into them, I found to be very interesting and instructive and helpful, really helpful to my own practice, and I think make a fine offering for all of us who may feel that we are who have committed to the Dharma path. When I received transmission in Zen Buddhism, we receive a chart which shows we're joining the lineage of the Buddha. And you look through, I think, 83 generations back to the old man himself, right? All this journey from India, and in our lineage through India into China, to Japan, and then out to the United States. And certain people in the lineage will feature prominently. It's kind of like the great luminaries of the tradition, beginning with the Buddha. So perhaps we'd have the Buddha, the sixth patriarch of Zen in China, Bodhidharma, I should say, the first ancestor in China, then the sixth patriarch, and it goes so forth. One of these main teachers was Nagarjuna, who was key in developing the teachings of emptiness in Mahayana Zen. Really, first, second century AD. Often in the when you go back to that era in India, it's usually give or take 100 years, because there's not much of a written record often, for one reason or another, you know. Whereas when you move to China, usually really good record keeping picks up in about the 6th century, and then you can really map it out pretty diligently. Doesn't matter. All we know, we could say that Nagarjuna was a teacher from the 1st or 2nd century who was a key philosopher, teacher, and shared Buddhism very widely and is still studied today. So he talked about these 6 paramis, and it was the part that I pulled out is a short teaching that's from his Precious Garland of Advice for a King. Now, apparently in this era, the king, or at least that king of northern India at that time, wanted to understand the key core tenets of Buddhism, but really didn't have a lot of time to go study. He's busy running the country, for good or for bad, right? So it's Nagarjuna, just give it to me. Can you give it to me in a few sentences? Can you really kind of sum up this this core teaching of Buddhism? And so Nagarjuna said, and here are our 6 paramis are generosity or dana, morality, perhaps better translated as now as ethical conduct, patience and diligence, meditation and wisdom. So these 6, generosity, ethical conduct, patience, diligence, meditation, wisdom. And he said, this is, in short, the great vehicle's meaning. That's a translation of Mahayana's meaning. That is the Mahayana. This, in brief, is the Buddha's true teaching. For the liberation of self and others, these 6 means are the treasure house. So Nagarjuna in these 6 steps. And there is something of a linear quality afoot here. If I start with the last 2, maybe a curious way to start, but the last 2, then I would see something of the method of Zen, meditation and wisdom for casting off self and other. I think it's fair to say that I encountered that as an emphasis in the Zen tradition, right? A lot of meditation and a lot of effort through koan study or different means in order to penetrate deeply into the nature of self. All of study, really, in Buddhism and Zen comes down to that core question, what is the self? How do we understand self-nature? That's the great question that we wrestle with. So meditation and wisdom. But I would say in my experience and my years at the Zen Center and my years of practice and with students and practicing with other teachers, it's a difficult path and a steep one. Zen usually requires this kind of great leap, right? And we can spend years in a place of, man, I've been doing this for a long time and I still don't really feel like I understand. But Nagarjuna approaches this in a different way. Nagarjuna is speaking to Buddhists or practitioners, way enterers. We may not identify as a Buddhist as such, and we don't need to, in order to avail ourselves of the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha is quite happy for he taught anyone. Right? If we look back into like some of the characters who the Buddha was teaching and hanging out with, I think many of us would think twice before yeah, just very, very, very challenging, but that's wonderful. That's like, that true inclusivity. He would teach anyone. Okay? So our beginning point here is this generosity. Generosity and ethical conduct and morality for benefiting others. Interesting that that is the starting point. I think it might be fair to say, as human beings, typically, if we live perhaps a life where we're not so much inquiring into spirituality, the default setting for a human being is self-centered view. That's our kind of base human condition. What's in it for me? I got to get mine. And that may extend to a few close family members or not, right? Or it may extend a further out to a particular group. But without practice, it may remain more of a self-centered view. Nagarjuna encouraged that as we for a way enterer, for somebody who has decided the path of the Dharma, this has something here. This has some truth. This here is something that I wish to be involved in. Then he says we must take the step to live for the benefit of others. Or perhaps you could say our to live for the benefit of self and other. But the collective endeavor, the choice is made that this life is not about just what I can glean from it, but this life, we really see that we really do see that we're all in it together at the bottom. And we see the 10,000 ways in which that principle is obscured and missed and forgotten. But as a Dharma practitioner, we understand this generosity of spirit and wishing to be of help, of usefulness and of service in life. That is the Sangha. That is the heart of Sangha right there. And it points to have opening the heart and living a generous life together. And what does this require? Generosity and morality or ethical conduct. If we wish to be of benefit, we're going to have some guardrails, right? We can't just run amok with our what we like and what we don't like to be of benefit. The life of a Dharma practitioner requires a commitment to ethical conduct and the taking on of some voluntary restriction. Right? The restriction of the perhaps more negative aspects of our self-nature, which we have managed to become very much aware of through meditation and through practice and through having them pointed out to us by kind friends. Right? So the wish to live generously, to be of use, to be of help to one another, and then seeing, there are precepts, there are guidelines. They don't have to be strictly Buddhist ones, right? But we need to take on a few guidelines here. Not necessarily strict dogmatic rules. Not a whole list of thou shalt nots, right? The precepts in Buddhism that are gathered together are key ways in which the sanghas over the generations have seen we screw things up, right? Through being angry, killing things, being stingy, talking about others' errors and faults, holding ourselves as superior to others. All these precepts point out, okay, here are some common ballpark ways that human beings make things difficult for other human beings in the world. Let's desist from these egregious ways and practice a more wholesome way through which everyone will benefit. But it's going to cost us something. We need some skin in the game in order to do that. So generosity, morality, or ethical conduct for benefiting others. The start, middle, and beginning of the way. Because in the Mahayana and sometimes in Zen or some spiritual paths, we'll be so focused on enlightenment and we want to reach this great awakening. And we may, we can even think, I want to be, perhaps I want to be a Buddha in this lifetime. Right? But the path of the Mahayana is the path of the Bodhisattva. It is enough to enter the way and then to commit to entering the way and practicing the Dharma. Again, we don't need those strict, we don't even have to call it the Dharma or the, we don't have to use these words. It's enough to say, I will commit to living as much as I can for the benefit of this one and that one, follow these guidelines and follow this path. Forever. Right, as a bodhisattva, until everyone is awake, until everyone is liberated from suffering. That's the path of the bodhisattva. There's a saying in the Korean Zen tradition that says, with the heart of Avalokiteshvara, right, with the canon, the bodhisattva compassion, only go straight ahead for 10,000 years, right? Not this week or till Christmas or, let's see in the new year, not for 10 years, 100 years, or even this, this lifetime, but to live this way 10,000 years. And now, in order to practice this way of a bodhisattva, Nagarjuna brings in our two, what we'll need. We will need patience and diligence. Patience for sure. Patience in great heaps, right? In great helpings of patience in order to practice this Dharma and to practice alongside our fellow way enterers and way seekers. We will need patience. We will be disappointed and frustrated. We will go down one-way streets, right? Or get on the, going in the wrong direction completely. We may fall off. We may clamber back on, fall off the raft, then clamber back on. But we'll need patience for this one and for that one. And diligence. Right? That's something I realized about Zen and Buddhism. It's like, oh, really? This is work too? Dang it. Man, just seems that in this realm of existence, anything worth really achieving is going to take a lot of work. So patience and diligence. That's for showing up too. Thank you for showing up today. That's a practice of Sangha. We make a commitment and we show up. And over time, we'll show up when we don't want to. We show up because others rely on us. Right? That's the collective practice. I say that sometimes people come along to a session, a retreat, a yokoji, 4 or 5 days in, they'll just say, this is the worst experience of my life. I'm having a terrible time. Every expectation I came here with has been shattered. My knees hurt. I want to go home. It's been a disaster. And I say, thank you. Carry on. You may have you may be having the worst retreat in Buddhist history, but you know what? That doesn't matter. The fact that you are sitting there doing this holds everyone else in the room up, encourages everybody else. Ultimately, it's not about you. It's not about me. Sometimes that advice goes down well. Sometimes it's not so well. Right? But we can laugh about it afterwards, usually. So patience and diligence. And interestingly says here, for casting off self and other, I should not forget, generosity and ethical conduct for benefiting others. Now we move into patience and diligence for cultivating self. Right? For refining ourselves, Nate, for refining this life. For refining this life. It's a curious thing. It started happening to me in my, I'm in my young 50s now. And I was just recently reminded, I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel like for the first time, I know a few things about just a couple of things about life. It's like, why didn't I learn these things why didn't somebody tell me about this stuff in my 20s or my 30s or 40s? Well, I'm sure they did, but I wasn't listening. So we cultivate the self through practice and diligence, and then we move to this meditation and wisdom with the heart of a bodhisattva, committing to living for the benefit of this one and that one. Nobody left out, everyone gets a cushion through the practice of, and then maintaining patience and diligence. And now really is the cherry on top. Okay, now we have our meditation, right? We have our time to sit. For many years of my practice, sitting was in order to realize something. Sitting was a means to an end, in order to achieve, to attain. Much more these days, I appreciate sitting as truly a time to do nothing at all. Like, how wonderful. There's nothing I need to do. I can just sit. And in fact, with meditation, all I need to do is get myself to the cushion of a chair or a bench. That's the me part, because often I don't want to sit. Jokai likes to do all kinds of things. For myself, fortunately, I live at a Zen center. So if someone rings a bell, I got to go. Right. But often I don't want to go. I doesn't want to sit. But if I has the commitment to get to the cushion and sit down, then, and this really struck me some years ago, I realized I am too intoxicated to drive this thing. Right. I've got all kinds of thoughts, ideas, ad infinitum. And so it's better that once I sit, that I hand the keys in to the Buddha. I always have a Buddha sitting behind me to help me with this. I hand the keys to the Buddha, and then there's nothing more to do but look out of the window and enjoy the ride and enjoy the journey. I was thinking, for you, all those of you in San Francisco, you've got Waymo cruising around now, so you can do the same thing when you want to get across town. We're we're not quite there yet down in this neck of the woods. Right, but that, meditation, just sitting and looking and experiencing, and then wisdom, the casting off self and other, the great wisdom that casts off self and other, that sees that as human beings we have this, we are born, we're running this software, this dualistic, human-centric, subject-object, divide everything software. That's the way we're navigating this reality. But it causes a lot of suffering. It causes a lot of problems. And so it deeply behooves us to sit, to practice, and to realize that which is beyond separation, to realize this original nature that you are, that I am, that all of us are, the Buddha and everyone ever born or to be born included in this original undivided self, before self and other are differentiated. It's a great wisdom of Buddhism. That's how the Buddha can declare, I, the great earth, all beings, are the wisdom and virtue of the awakened one. Everyone is included in that. The whole earth is included in that. And he ends with, this is for the liberation of self and others. These 6 means are the treasure house. So just in a very short, concise 6 steps, Nagarjuna. Well, Your Royal Highness, you wanted the core of the teachings. Here it is. Practice it, live it, all of your life. If you do so, you'll reduce suffering, you'll promote benefit. And whether you're a Buddhist or not, that's a life well lived. Thank you. I don't want to go over time. I realize this is why I don't talk about 10 parameters, right? We'd be here till this afternoon. So six is probably a little bit of a stretch, but we have a little, I think we have a little time for some questions, for comments, anything you would like to ask, share, or please, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, we'll bring everybody up into the picture here. So if anybody wants online to ask a question, just raise your hand in the Zoom room.
Yeah, you can probably close the chat, Henry. I think Tom raised his hand on the. There you go.
Yeah, Tom, please unmute and speak.
Hi, Jokai.
Hi.
Wow, thanks again. Thank you for such a succinct distillation of the entirety of the practice. It's comforting to have it distilled down to something that's so seemingly simple, of course,
Yeah.
to engage with, to commit to.
Yeah.
That's what I heard you talking about. This is the commitment. This is what it takes.
Mhm.
And it's particularly salient for me because in just under 3 weeks, 4 of us are going off to Indonesia for a 4 week self-led retreat. It's just 4 of us doing our thing day in, day out for 4 weeks straight. Um, and it can seem a little overwhelming, but you've grounded me in how to approach it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your comment. And yeah, I wish you safe travels and a great adventure.
Jokai, I have a question for you.
So,
This is Henry. But between the third and fourth and the fifth and sixth in the paramis that you listed, you had the second line was to cultivate the self, and
yeah,
then the third line was to uh, get rid of the self or abandon it. So I guess the question is, why are we cultivating the self and then getting rid of the self? Does that make sense? It
it
seems.
does. And it's a good question. And I don't remember which kind of psychologist to credit with this, but I read somewhere where you have to have a healthy self before you throw it away. I think that's so. And like in a very like real way. I've seen that in like in Zen practice that I've seen here. People will come to practice and be troubled by by our karma, by our conditioning, by trauma, by relationships, and a lot of that really needs to be explored and dealt with, maybe not just in a dharma, in whatever modalities are useful. We really need to understand the self well before we move to a place of letting the self of letting the self go. Otherwise, you really just can't move away from the grasping at the self. The body mind is very smart in that way. If it's something that's really needs to be worked on, then it'll be there until you deal with it. And if you try and just like throw that away or repress that, or well, good luck, because it's going to come back, right? So there's definitely for each one of us, a lot of the practice is there's been a lot of slings and arrows, and we really need to work on those things. And that's a long practice right there. Ultimately, that sense of letting go and self and other is this original mind now. This is a manifestation of and the appearance of non-self. The original nature, which includes all of us, we're all together and we're undivided. That so curiously, we're starting a home plate and we're going on this long journey and we're ending up a home plate. But in order to really to see that, for that to have real meaning, each of us has to run the basis of working through our personal, you know, that personal karma, our life, and coming to terms with it. You know, not fixing it, right? but understanding it. Like I'm coming to terms and understanding it. That way, then you are a person who can understand others better too. You know, I remember like for myself, I was at the Zen Center for a number of years, and then I left, and I had an idea that I was somewhat enlightened, you know, forgive me, right? I thought I'm pretty set at this point, and I went out into the world, and boy, did the world humble me and disavow me of that notion. And I went through very, very difficult life experience. And by the time, and then in my second stint here, when I came back, gosh, the practice felt so much more real and vital to me. And then when I started to have conversations with other people, and they would describe their own difficulties and traumas, for the first time then, I actually had empathy because I'd experienced it myself. But before I did that work, before I went through that, if somebody described their problems to me, I'd be thinking in my head, yeah, okay, well, come on, you know, chin up, tie your bootlaces, you know. So I would say that in terms of that cultivating the self before casting off the self, we really need to thoroughly explore the self in order to better understand self and other.
Thank you. That is helpful.
Yeah.
We have a question from John E.
Hey, John.
Hi, thank you so much, Jokai. This is a question about the negative qualities of self. And
Yeah.
whenever I hear negative, it triggers this reaction like, what, you know, when I'm sitting or when I'm in the world and I experience anger or something that might be on that negative list, whatever it is, it feels to me like I'm making a split between positive and negative. And so maybe if I'm sitting and my knees hurt, I need to sit in a chair instead of sit on the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just a question about that, the difference between patience and diligence and splitting negative and positive and feeling like I have to get rid of something in order to be whole.
Yeah. You don't have to get rid of something to be whole, that's for sure. You're whole from the beginning. Negative and positive is dangerous binary system to bring in. Any of these kind of dualities, you know, especially if it's a negative and positive, which somebody else decided were negatives and positives. Throw that out for a start, right? It's like, what is it that we're calling negative and positive? For myself, I use the same approach, whether it's so-called positive or so-called negative, which is what is appropriate. What is appropriate to the appearance of the world, the causes and conditions of life now, right? So I like much more what is appropriate. For instance, you know, somebody scams you online out of $1,000. I'd be angry as all hell. Is that appropriate? Yes, I would say so. You know, I'm angry at things that are happening in the world. I'm angry at things every, you know, most days actually. Something makes me angry. But, you know, when you look into those more so-called negative, be careful not to judge them against some Buddhist standard of I should never be angry. I should be happy, or I should be joyful, or I should, you know, I shoulds. See the way that it is. Anger has its place. The whole wealth of the human experience has its place, has its function. The difficulty is when our function is out of sync with reality. That's when we get into problems, right? We consumed with a narrative, and now I'm angry about it, and I'm visiting my anger out on the world, and there's no match there because the narrative doesn't, you know, because it's so none of these energies are intrinsically wrong, but if they're acted out inappropriately, and I mean inappropriately is not matching what's real, what's actually happening, then we tend to go astray. And that's the great gift of present awareness, which we practice in sit and meditation and just in our wakeful everyday life. Because that appropriate response can be found much more naturally if we're awake and aware as our basis. You know, if we're awake and aware and involved in our environment, then, and the people in it, there's much more opportunity for what's appropriate to come through. If we're collapsed in between our ears, we're spending too much time reading stuff on the internet, you know, and we're building some idea of the world, that's where we fall into those out of sync worldviews. And that's much more what I talk about as positive and negative. It's like when your knees hurt, get a cushion. Your back hurts, maybe move to a chair. You know, whatever is going on, find the appropriate response based on those conditions. That's like, then you run into your own rule book, you run into your own guidelines, you run into the guidelines of reality, not some ideas of what's positive and negative, which are pre-described.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jokai.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I didn't have much time for conversation there. I ran on a little bit, but I hope that's okay.
I think the questions and answers were very helpful.
Good, thank you.